The sweltering Texas sun bore down on Violet Valentine as she stood defiant before the town council of Llano. Her fists clenched so tightly her knuckles whitened. It was 1875, and she had just been told for the third time that she was unfit to inherit her father's ranch because she was unmarried, unwilling to bend, and too stubborn for any decent man to take as a bride. "Miss Valentine," Judge Porter intoned, peering over his spectacles with the condescending air of a man who believed women belonged in kitchens and nurseries. "Your father's will clearly states that Rocking V Ranch passes to you only if you are married by your 25th birthday. That date has come and gone." Violet straightened her spine, ignoring the whispers that rippled through the small courthouse. At 26, she was considered well on her way to spinsterhood in Llano, Texas. "My father taught me everything about ranching. I've been running that place since I was 16, since Mother died. I know every acre, every cow, every problem that needs fixing." "That may be so," the judge replied, unmoved, "but the law is clear. A woman needs a husband to manage such affairs. The will states that without a marriage, the property goes to your cousin Thomas." Thomas Valentine sat in the front row, a smug smile creeping across his face. He hadn't spent a day working honest labor in his life, but he was male, and in 1875 Texas, that was qualification enough. "Thomas doesn't know the first thing about ranching," Violet argued, her voice rising. "He'll run it into the ground within a year." "Perhaps if you weren't so bull-headed and difficult," Thomas drawled, "you might have found a husband by now." "No man wants a woman who thinks she knows better than him." Laughter rippled through the room. Violet's cheeks burned, but she refused to lower her gaze. "We'll give you one final opportunity," Judge Porter said, silencing the room with a raised hand. "You have 30 days to find a husband, or the Rocking V goes to Thomas. That's my final ruling." As the gavel came down, Violet turned on her heel and strode from the courthouse, ignoring the curious stares and whispers that followed her. Outside in the dusty street, she breathed deeply, fighting back tears of frustration. The Rocking V wasn't just land, it was her home, her legacy, her very identity. "Quite a performance in there," a deep voice commented. Violet whirled around to find a tall man leaning against a hitching post. His hat was pulled low over his eyes, but she could see the shadow of stubble on his jaw and the hint of a smile on his lips. Dust covered his clothes, marking him as a traveler recently arrived. "Were you eavesdropping?" she demanded. "Hard not to when the whole town's talking about it," he replied, straightening up. He was taller than she'd first thought, broad-shouldered and lean-hipped. "I'm Aaron Xavier. Just rode in from Colorado." Violet assessed him coolly. "Well, Mr. Xavier, unless you're here to offer a solution to my predicament, I suggest you find someone else to amuse yourself with." "Actually," he said, falling into step beside her as she began walking toward her horse, "I might be able to help you." She stopped and faced him squarely. "How? Are you going to convince the judge that women are capable of running businesses? Or perhaps you've brought news that the world has suddenly become fair?" His blue eyes crinkled with amusement. "Neither, unfortunately, but I am looking for work, and I hear you might be in need of a ranch hand." Violet scoffed. "What I need is a miracle, Mr. Xavier, or a husband who'll sign the papers and then disappear into the sunset." Aaron Xavier tilted his head, studying her with unexpected seriousness. "Sometimes the solution isn't what we expect it to be, Miss Valentine." "How do you know my name?" "Like I said, the whole town's talking about the stubborn Valentine girl." He didn't say it unkindly, which was perhaps the only reason she didn't walk away. "I've been looking for a place to settle, and I know ranching. Worked a cattle spread in Colorado for 5 years." Violet eyed him skeptically. I don't need charity or pity. Good, because I'm not offering either, he replied. I'm offering honest work for honest pay, and maybe, if you're willing to listen, a few ideas about your predicament. Something about his steady gaze made her pause. He didn't look at her the way most men did, with either dismissal or unwelcome interest. Instead, there was a respect in his eyes that she rarely encountered. The rocking V is 3 miles east of town, she said finally. If you're serious about work, come by tomorrow morning. But I warn you, I run a tight operation and I don't tolerate laziness or incompetence. Aaron Xavier tipped his hat. Yes, madam, I wouldn't expect anything less. As Violet mounted her horse, she couldn't help but wonder about the stranger. There was something different about him, a quiet confidence that didn't need to announce itself. Still, she'd learned long ago not to put her trust in men who made promises. They had a habit of disappearing when things got difficult. The ride back to the rocking V gave her time to think. 30 days. Just 30 days to find a solution, or lose everything her father had built, everything she had worked for since she was old enough to throw a rope. The ranch came into view as she crested the final hill, a sprawling main house with a wide porch, surrounded by barns, corrals, and bunkhouses. Beyond stretched the grazing lands, thousands of acres that had been Valentine land for 2 generations. Her heart ached at the thought of Thomas taking possession, selling off the cattle, possibly even selling the land itself to the railroad companies that were hungry for every inch of Texas soil. As she dismounted in front of the house, her foreman, Hank Miller, approached with a worried expression. "How'd it go in town?" he asked, though his face suggested he already knew the answer. "About as well as a calf in quicksand," Violet replied, handing him the reins. 30 days to find a husband, or Thomas gets everything. Hank shook his head, his weathered face creased with concern. "That ain't right. Your pa would be turning in his grave knowing what they're trying to do." "Pa should have changed his will after Mother died," Violet said, more bitterly than she intended. "He knew I could run this place. He just never imagined the council would be so determined to take it from me." "What will you do?" Violet removed her gloves, slapping them against her thigh in frustration. "I don't know yet, but I won't give up without a fight." She glanced at Hank. "There's a man coming tomorrow looking for work. Aaron Xavier says he ranched in Colorado. We could use the extra hands," Hank acknowledged. "Spring roundup's coming and we're short since the Jones boys left. Keep an eye on him," Violet instructed. "I want to know if he's as good as he claims." That evening, as Violet sat on the porch watching the sun set over her land, she considered her options. She could try to contest the will again, but with the same judge hearing the case, the outcome would be the same. She could look for a husband, a real one, but the prospects in Llano were slim, and she'd already rejected most of them over the years. Or she could find a man willing to enter a marriage of convenience, someone who would sign the papers and then leave her to run the ranch as she always had. The thought made her stomach churn. It seemed a betrayal of everything she believed in, everything she'd fought for, the right to stand on her own, to be judged by her abilities rather than her gender or marital status. But what choice did she have? As darkness fell, Violet made her decision. She would fight with every weapon at her disposal. If that meant finding a temporary husband, so be it. But he would be a man of her choosing, on her terms. The ranch would remain hers in everything but name. With that resolution, she went inside, unaware that her life was about to change in ways she could never have anticipated. Dawn broke clear and cool the next morning. Violet had been up since before first light, checking on a pregnant heifer in the barn. She was just returning to the house when she spotted a rider approaching. Even at a distance, she recognized Aaron Xavier's broad shoulders and the easy way he sat his horse. Right on time, she murmured to herself, impressed despite her skepticism. He dismounted in one fluid motion, leading his horse to the water trough. Up close, in the clear morning light, she could see him better than she had in town. His face was tanned and weathered, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of years squinting against the sun. He wasn't handsome in the conventional way of the dandies who frequented Lano's saloons, but there was a strength to his features that was undeniably attractive. "Morning, Miss Valentine," he greeted her, removing his hat briefly. "Ready to put me to work?" "That depends," she replied. "What exactly can you do?" "Just about anything that needs doing on a cattle ranch," he said without boasting. "Breaking horses, mending fences, driving cattle. I'm fair with a rope and decent with numbers if you need help with the books." Violet raised an eyebrow. "Most cowboys I know can barely sign their names, let alone keep books." A smile flitted across his face. "I wasn't always a cowboy. My father was a schoolteacher back east before we came west." Before she could inquire further, Hank emerged from the barn. "This our new hand?" "Potentially," Violet answered. "Mr. Xavier, this is Hank Miller, my foreman." "Hank, why don't you take Mr. Xavier out to the south pasture? The fence line there needs mending, and we've had problems with strays from the Porter place." "Yes, madam," Hank replied, giving Aaron an assessing look. "Got your own gear?" "In my saddlebags," Aaron confirmed. "And please call me Aaron. Mr. Xavier was my father." Violet watched as the two men rode off, Aaron's back straight in the saddle, his movements confident and easy. There was something about him that didn't quite fit the typical drifting cowboy mold, but she couldn't put her finger on what it was. Throughout the morning, Violet tended to the ranch business, checking the books and planning for the spring roundup that was just weeks away. But her mind kept drifting back to her predicament. 30 days, 29 now. The clock was ticking. At midday, she saddled her mare and rode out to check on the men. She found them finishing the fence repairs, working efficiently together as if they'd been partners for years. "How's he doing?" she asked Hank quietly as Aaron secured the last stretch of barbed wire. "Knows his stuff," Hank admitted. "Fixed that fence in half the time it would have taken me and one of the other boys, and he spotted signs of rustlers on the north boundary." Violet frowned. "Rustlers?" "We haven't had trouble with thieves in months." "Fresh tracks," Aaron said, joining them. 3 riders, probably took 4 or 5 head, judging by the trail. Recent too, within the last day or so." "Show me," Violet demanded, her personal problems temporarily forgotten in the face of this new threat. They rode to the north boundary, where Aaron pointed out the signs: broken branches, hoof prints, disturbed earth where cattle had been forced through a gap in the fence. "You've got a good eye," Violet acknowledged grudgingly. "Tracking was a necessary skill in Colorado," Aaron replied, "especially when you're responsible for herds spread across open range." "Can you tell where they were headed?" Aaron studied the ground. "East, toward the river." "My guess is they're using the water to cover their tracks, then driving the cattle north to sell in the territories." Violet's jaw tightened. "Ned Porter's been trying to drive me out for years. Wouldn't put it past him to hire rustlers to weaken my herd before roundup." "You want to go after them?" Aaron asked. She considered it. Going after rustlers was dangerous work, especially with just the 3 of them. But letting thieves take her cattle without consequences would only invite more trouble. "We'll track them," she decided. "At least find out where they're taking my cattle." "Hank, ride back to the ranch and get Sam and Diego. Tell them to bring rifles and supplies for 2 days." "You sure about this, Miss Violet?" Hank asked, concern evident in his voice. "Those rustlers could be dangerous men." "So am I a dangerous woman when someone steals what's mine," she replied firmly. Hank nodded, knowing better than to argue, and turned his horse back toward the ranch. When he was gone, Aaron looked at Violet with a new respect in his eyes. Most ranchers would send their men after rustlers, not lead the chase themselves. Most ranchers aren't fighting to keep their land from being stolen out from under them, she retorted. Besides, no one knows this territory better than I do. They followed the trail in silence for a while, Violet impressed despite herself at how easily Aaron read the signs of the rustlers, passing a broken twig here, a hoofprint there, places where the cattle had been driven too quickly and left deeper impressions in the soft earth. "You said you were from Colorado," she said eventually. "What brought you to Texas?" Aaron was quiet for a moment. "Time for a change, I suppose. The ranch I worked for was sold. New owner brought in his own men. And you just happened to ride into Llano right when I'm looking for help." He glanced at her, a hint of amusement in his blue eyes. "Sometimes fate works in mysterious ways, Miss Valentine." "I don't believe in fate," she said flatly. "I believe in hard work and making your own way." "Those too," he agreed. "But sometimes the right person appears at the right moment. You can call it coincidence if you prefer." They rode in silence again, following the increasingly clear trail. The rustlers weren't being particularly careful, confident perhaps that no one would pursue them so quickly. "They're getting careless," Aaron commented as they found a still smoldering campfire near the river. "Can't be more than a few hours ahead of us." Violet dismounted to examine the campsite. "3 men, like you said. They stopped to eat." She picked up a discarded tin can. "Beans. And they left trash behind." Her lip curled in disgust. "Amateurs or arrogant fools. Either way, that works to our advantage," Aaron replied. He surveyed the surrounding area. "They crossed the river here, water's shallow enough for the cattle to ford." They remounted and carefully crossed the river, picking up the trail on the other side. The terrain was becoming rockier, with scrubby juniper trees dotting the landscape. Perfect country for hiding stolen cattle until they could be moved to market. "There's an old line shack about 5 miles ahead," Violet explained. "Used to be part of the Rocking V before my father sold that section. It would be a good place to hold cattle temporarily." "Let's approach carefully," Aaron advised. "If that's where they're headed, we don't want to alert them." As they rode, Violet found herself studying Aaron Xavier when he wasn't looking. There was an ease to him, a quiet confidence that was unusual in the drifting cowboys who typically passed through Llano. He sat his horse like he'd been born to it, yet spoke with an education that hinted at a different background. "You said your father was a schoolteacher," she ventured after a while. "How did you end up as a cowboy?" A shadow passed over his face. "War changes things." "After the fighting, there wasn't much left of our town in Virginia. My father tried to rebuild his school, but his heart wasn't in it anymore. We headed west for a fresh start." "You fought in the war." She tried to calculate his age. He couldn't be much more than 30. "Joined up in '64 when I was 18, he said quietly. "Served under General Sheridan until Appomattox. A Union man then." Violet's father had been a Confederate like most Texans, but he'd rarely spoken of the war in his later years. The divisions that had once seemed so important had faded somewhat in the decade since the fighting ended, at least in frontier towns where survival demanded cooperation. "My father was at Shiloh," she said. "Came home with a limp and nightmares that never quite went away." Aaron nodded, understanding in his eyes. Some wounds don't heal visibly. The conversation died as they approached a rise that would give them a view of the line shack. They dismounted and crept forward on foot, keeping low. The old cabin came into view in the small valley below. Smoke rose from the chimney, and in a makeshift corral beside it, Violet could see several cattle bearing the Rocking V brand. 4 head, she whispered. Just like you thought. Aaron nodded, scanning the area. 3 horses tied up outside. Looks like they're settling in for a while. Probably waiting for cover of darkness to move them further north, Violet reasoned. We should wait for Hank and the others before we do anything. Agreed, Aaron said. Though it might be wise to get a closer look, see who we're dealing with. Violet hesitated, weighing the risk. I'll go, she decided. I know this area better than you. With all due respect, Miss Valentine, I have more experience with this kind of situation, Aaron countered. And if something goes wrong, you're the one they'll be looking for. She wanted to argue but knew he was right. Fine. But be careful. I don't want to have to explain to Hank how I got my new hand shot on his first day. Aaron's mouth curved in a brief smile. I appreciate your concern. He moved with surprising stealth for such a large man, keeping to the cover of rocks and brush as he made his way down the slope. Violet watched, her heart inexplicably beating faster as he approached the cabin. He was almost to a position behind the corral when one of the horses nickered, sensing his presence. The cabin door opened, and a man stepped out, rifle in hand. From her position, Violet couldn't see his face clearly, but she recognized the distinctive hat of Ned Porter's foreman, Bill Taylor. Aaron froze in place, partially concealed behind a juniper. For a long, tense moment, Violet thought he'd been spotted. But Taylor merely scanned the area, then turned to check on the horses. Aaron used the opportunity to retreat, making his way back up the slope with the same careful movements. It's Taylor and probably Porter's other men, Violet said when Aaron rejoined her. I recognize the hat. Aaron nodded. 3 men, all armed. They've made themselves comfortable in there. Looks like they're planning to stay at least until tomorrow. They retreated to where they'd left their horses and rode back a safe distance to wait for Hank and the others. This confirms what I suspected, Violet said bitterly. Ned Porter's been after my land for years. He's trying to weaken my position before Roundup, make it harder for me to meet my contracts. From what I heard in town, he's not the only one who wants to see you fail, Aaron commented. Violet's eyes flashed. The town council thinks a woman has no business running a ranch. They've been looking for ways to force me out since my father died. This ruling about marriage is just their latest attempt. Have you considered their offer? Aaron asked carefully. Finding a husband, I mean. A husband who would control my property, make my decisions, and probably run my ranch into the ground, she scoffed. No, thank you. What if you found a man who wouldn't do those things? Aaron suggested. Someone who would respect that it's your ranch, your decisions. Violet looked at him sharply. Men like that don't exist, Mr. Xavier. At least, none that I've ever met. Perhaps you haven't been looking in the right places, he replied. Before she could respond, they heard the approach of riders. Hank, Sam, and Diego appeared over the ridge, each leading a pack horse loaded with supplies. We found them, Violet called as they approached. At the old line shack, just as I suspected. It's Taylor and Porter's men. Hank's weathered face hardened. Porter's been wanting to start trouble for a while now. Guess he finally found the nerve. They quickly formulated a plan. They would wait until nightfall, then approach the cabin from different directions. The goal was to catch the rustlers by surprise and recover the cattle without bloodshed if possible. As darkness fell, they moved into position. Violet insisted on taking part despite Hank's objections. It's my ranch, my cattle, she said firmly. I'm not sitting this out. They waited until the lights in the cabin dimmed, suggesting the men inside were settling down for the night. Then, on Hank's signal, they moved in. Aaron and Violet approached from the rear, near the corral where the stolen cattle were held. Hank and the others covered the front and sides of the cabin. They had almost reached the corral when a twig snapped under Violet's boot. Instantly, A lantern flared to life inside the cabin and the door burst open. "Who's out there?" Taylor's voice demanded. "It's Violet Valentine," she called back, straightening up with her rifle ready. "You're holding stolen cattle, Taylor, and I've come to take them back." Laughter erupted from the cabin. "Well, well, if it isn't the little lady rancher," Taylor mocked. "Come to do a man's job." "I see 3 thieves who aren't man enough to work for what they want," she retorted. "Stealing cattle in the night like cowards." A shot rang out, the bullet embedding itself in the ground near Violet's feet. Aaron moved with lightning speed, pulling her behind the cover of the corral fence. "Next one won't miss, Valentine," Taylor shouted. "You and whoever's with you better clear out before we decide to add murder to our night's work." Hank's voice rang out from the darkness. "You're surrounded, Taylor. 3 guns at your front, 2 at your back. Put down your weapons and come out peacefully." A tense silence followed. Violet could practically hear the rustlers calculating their odds. "Porter won't like us giving up his investment," one of the men inside muttered, just loud enough to be heard. "So it was Porter who put you up to this," Violet called. "I'm sure the sheriff will be interested to hear that." "Sheriff won't do nothing to Ned Porter," Taylor shot back. "He's got friends on the town council. You're the one they're trying to run off, Valentine." "Maybe so," she acknowledged, "but cattle rustling is still a hanging offense in Texas." "Are you willing to risk your neck for Ned Porter?" Another silence followed. Then slowly the cabin door opened wider. "We're coming out," Taylor said reluctantly. "Don't shoot." One by one, the 3 men emerged, hands raised. Diego and Sam moved in quickly to disarm them, while Hank kept his rifle trained on the group. "Tie them up," Violet instructed. "We'll take them and the cattle back to Rocking V tonight, then to the sheriff in the morning." As Diego and Sam secured the rustlers, Aaron turned to Violet. "You handled that well." "Not my first confrontation with thieves," she replied, though she felt a surge of pride at his approval. They drove the recovered cattle ahead of them, with the 3 bound rustlers riding under guard. It was well past midnight when they reached the Rocking V, where the prisoners were locked in a storage shed until morning. Exhausted but satisfied, Violet stood on the porch, watching as Hank and the others settled the returned cattle into a nearby pasture. "A successful night's work," Aaron commented, joining her. "Yes," she agreed, "though I doubt this will be the end of Porter's schemes." "No," Aaron said thoughtfully, "but it might make him think twice about such direct methods in the future." Violet studied him in the moonlight. "You handled yourself well out there. Most new hands wouldn't have jumped into a situation like that on their first day." He shrugged. "Seemed like the right thing to do." "Why are you really here, Mr. Xavier?" she asked suddenly. "And don't tell me it's just a coincidence that you rode into town right when I needed help." Aaron leaned against the porch railing, considering her question. "I heard about a stubborn rancher named Valentine who was fighting the whole town to keep what was rightfully hers. I admire that kind of determination." "So it's admiration that brought you to my door," skepticism colored her voice. "Partly," he admitted, "and partly something else. I've been drifting since the war, Miss Valentine, working ranches, moving on when the seasons change. But lately I've been thinking it's time to put down roots. And you chose Lano, Texas. There are easier places to settle. Easier, yes, but few with the opportunities I see here." Violet wasn't sure what to make of his answer. There was something he wasn't telling her, but his actions so far had earned him at least a measure of trust. "Get some rest, Mr. Xavier," she said finally. "Tomorrow promises to be eventful." True to her prediction, taking the rustlers to the sheriff the next morning created quite a stir in Lano. Sheriff Wilson was reluctant to hold Taylor and the others, clearly uncomfortable with the implications of arresting Ned Porter's men. It's their word against yours, Miss Valentine, he hedged in his office. And Mr. Porter is a respected member of this community. We caught them red-handed with my cattle, Violet argued. 4 witnesses besides myself. Ranch hands who work for you, the sheriff pointed out. Hardly impartial witnesses. I don't work for Miss Valentine, Aaron interjected calmly. I just arrived in town yesterday. I have no reason to lie about what I saw. Sheriff Wilson studied Aaron with newfound interest. And who might you be, Mr. Aaron Xavier, formerly of the 5th Cavalry under General Sheridan. Before that, I rode with the Michigan Volunteer Cavalry. The mention of his military service seemed to give the sheriff pause. Union man, eh? The war's been over for 10 years, Sheriff, Aaron replied evenly. But yes, I fought for the Union, and I've been working ranches throughout the West since then. I have no stake in local disputes, but I know cattle rustling when I see it. The sheriff sighed, clearly unhappy but unable to dismiss the evidence entirely. I'll hold them for now. But don't be surprised if Judge Porter sets bail by afternoon. Judge Porter is Ned Porter's brother, Violet explained to Aaron as they left the sheriff's office. See what I'm up against in this town? Aaron nodded thoughtfully. Family connections are powerful, especially in small towns. But they're not unbeatable. They were crossing the street toward the general store when Ned Porter himself emerged from the saloon, his face flushed with anger. Valentine, he shouted. You've gone too far this time. Violet stopped, facing him squarely. By recovering my stolen property. I don't think so, Porter. Porter stomped toward them, his substantial belly leading the way. He'd once been a formidable rancher himself, but years of easy living had softened him considerably. You've got no proof my men did anything wrong, he blustered. This is harassment, pure and simple. We caught them with my cattle, Porter, Violet replied calmly. Cattle bearing my brand in a cabin on land you now own. That proves nothing. They could have been strays they were returning to you. Aaron stepped forward slightly. Is that why one of your men mentioned you wouldn't like them giving up your investment? Those were his exact words, Mr. Porter. Porter's face darkened as he noticed Aaron for the first time. Who the hell are you, Aaron Xavier? I witnessed your men with stolen cattle last night. Another hired gun, Porter sneered. Valentine's so desperate she's recruiting drifters to tell lies for her. Aaron's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. I'm not in the habit of lying, Mr. Porter. Nor am I in the habit of standing by while men try to intimidate women. Porter stepped closer, his bulk imposing despite his poor condition. You threatening me, mister? Not at all, Aaron replied calmly. Just stating facts. A crowd had begun to gather, townsfolk drawn by the confrontation in the main street. Violet was acutely aware of the whispers, the curious stares, the judgment in many eyes. This isn't over, Valentine, Porter growled, backing down slightly in the face of Aaron's steady gaze. You won't keep that ranch. One way or another you'll be gone before summer. We'll see about that, Violet replied, refusing to be intimidated. As Porter stormed off, muttering threats, Aaron turned to Violet. You weren't exaggerating about the opposition you face. That's just one example, she said grimly. Come on, let's get the supplies we need and head back to the ranch. As they loaded supplies into the wagon, Violet was conscious of the speculative glances from townspeople, the hushed conversations that stopped when she drew near. Aaron's presence at her side was clearly causing talk, a new man appearing just when her deadline to marry was looming. They're already gossiping about you, she observed as they drove out of town. You might want to consider if working for me is worth the trouble it'll bring you. Aaron guided the team of horses confidently, his hands steady on the reins. I'm not particularly concerned with gossip, Miss Valentine, and trouble has a way of finding me whether I look for it or not. There's that mysterious air again, she noted. You still haven't really explained why you're here. He glanced at her, a half-smile playing on his lips. Let's just say I recognized a kindred spirit when I heard about your fight. People told you that you couldn't do something because of who you are, not because of your abilities. I've faced similar judgments. Because you're a northerner in Texas. That's part of it, he acknowledged. But there's more to a man than where he fought in a war that should be long forgotten. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the wagon rattling over the rutted road back to Rocking V. What will you do if they release Porter's men? Aaron asked eventually. Violet sighed. Keep watching my boundaries. Document any further theft. Fight them every step of the way. And about the marriage requirement, you have what, 28 days now? 27, she corrected. And I don't know. Every eligible man in the county either wants to control me, doesn't respect me, or is completely unsuitable to help run a ranch. There's always the possibility of a marriage in name only, Aaron suggested carefully. Find someone willing to sign the papers but leave the ranch management to you. Violet shot him a suspicious look. Are you volunteering, Mr. Xavier? He met her gaze steadily. Would that be so terrible? Her heart skipped a beat, but she quickly regained her composure. I hardly know you. You could be a fortune hunter, a criminal, or worse. All valid concerns, he agreed, which is why I'm not formally offering yet. But I am suggesting you keep an open mind about solutions that might not be conventional. Violet mulled over his words as they continued toward the ranch. Aaron Xavier was undeniably intriguing, competent, respectful, and seemingly without the prejudices that plagued most men she encountered. But trusting a virtual stranger with her future, with her father's legacy, seemed like madness. Yet what choice did she have? 27 days was hardly enough time to find a suitable husband under normal circumstances, let alone with her reputation for being too stubborn preceding her. As they approached the Rocking V, Violet made a decision. You have a job here as long as you want it, Mr. Xavier. Prove yourself trustworthy in that and we'll discuss other possibilities. Aaron nodded, a hint of satisfaction in his expression. Fair enough, Miss Valentine. I look forward to the opportunity. Over the next week, Aaron Xavier proved his worth many times over. He worked tirelessly from dawn to dusk, showing skill with cattle, horses, and the countless repair jobs that a working ranch required. He got along well with the other hands, earning their respect through action rather than words. And he treated Violet with a deference that never slipped into condescension, consulting her on decisions, respecting her authority, but not hesitating to offer his opinion when asked. Violet found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, noting the easy grace with which he moved, the quiet competence he brought to every task. There was a mystery to him that intrigued her, depth she sensed but couldn't quite fathom. 10 days after Aaron's arrival, disaster struck. One of the ranch hands came galloping into the yard as Violet and Aaron were discussing plans for the spring roundup. Fire! The young cowboy shouted, pointing toward the eastern horizon where a plume of dark smoke was rising. The east pasture's burning. Round up everyone, Violet ordered instantly. Get the water wagons, blankets, shovels, everything we've got. Diego, ride to the neighboring ranches for help. The ranch burst into frantic activity as men rushed to follow her commands. Violet herself ran to the barn to saddle her horse, Aaron close behind her. This isn't accidental, she said grimly as they worked. That pasture has the best spring grazing. Without it, I'll have to sell cattle before roundup or watch them starve. Porter? Aaron asked, tightening his cinch with practiced movements. Who else? The rustling didn't work, so he's escalated. They rode hard toward the smoke, leading a wagon filled with water barrels and firefighting equipment. As they crested the hill overlooking the east pasture, Violet's heart sank. The fire was spreading rapidly, driven by a steady breeze, devouring the drought-dry grass that would have fed her cattle in the critical weeks ahead. "We need to establish a fire break," Aaron called over the sound of approaching hooves as the rest of the ranch hands arrived. "There, along that low ridge, if we can clear a wide enough strip, we might be able to contain it." Violet nodded, quickly organizing the men into teams. Some began frantically digging up the soil to create a bare strip that the fire couldn't cross, while others used wet blankets to beat at the flames along the edges. For hours they fought the blaze, faces blackened with soot, lungs burning from smoke. The neighboring ranchers arrived with their own men, putting aside petty disputes in the face of the common enemy that was wildfire. Even in Texas, where water rights and grazing boundaries could spark lifelong feuds, fire was a threat that united rather than divided. Aaron worked tirelessly at Violet's side, his shirt soaked with sweat, his arms blackened to the elbows with ash and dirt. When a sudden shift in the wind sent a wall of flame toward a group of young ranch hands, he raced forward without hesitation, pulling them to safety seconds before the fire engulfed the spot where they'd been standing. By sunset, they had the fire contained, though small pockets still burned throughout the pasture. Violet stood on the ridge, surveying the devastation. Nearly 300 acres of prime grazing land reduced to ash and smoldering embers. The financial loss was staggering, but the implications were worse. Without this pasture, she would struggle to maintain her herd through the spring. "We'll get through this," Aaron said quietly, coming to stand beside her. Violet turned to him, too exhausted for pride. "How?" "The spring contracts will be impossible to fulfill now. I'll have to sell off part of the herd at rock-bottom prices just to keep the rest fed." "There are other options," Aaron said. "The Double X Ranch to the north has grazing land they're not using. I rode by there yesterday." "The Double X belongs to James Williams. He's been trying to buy Rocking V for years. He won't help me." "Let me talk to him," Aaron suggested. "Sometimes a neutral party can negotiate where old rivalries stand in the way." Violet studied him, noticing for the first time a burn on his forearm where his sleeve had been rolled up. "You're hurt." Aaron glanced down dismissively. "It's nothing." She took his arm gently, examining the angry red skin. "This needs tending. Come back to the house." In the kitchen, Violet cleaned the burn with cool water, then applied a salve of her own, making beeswax mixed with herbs her mother had taught her to use for healing. Aaron sat patiently, watching her work. "You've done this before," he observed. "Ranch life isn't gentle on the body," she replied, carefully wrapping clean linen around his forearm. "My mother taught me basic doctoring before she died. It's come in handy more times than I can count." "Your mother sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was," Violet said softly. "She came west with my father when this was barely settled territory, helped him build the first cabin on this land with her own hands. When she died of fever, part of my father died with her." "Is that when he added the marriage clause to his will?" Violet nodded, finishing the bandage. "He worried what would happen to me without protection. He meant well, but he underestimated his daughter," Aaron completed the thought. "Yes," she agreed, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting, of the warmth of his skin beneath her fingers. She drew back slightly. "There, that should heal if you keep it clean." Aaron flexed his arm carefully. "Thank you, you have a healer's touch." Something in his voice made her look up, meeting his eyes. For a moment, neither spoke, the air between them charged with an awareness that had been building gradually over the past days. Violet broke the contact first, standing to put away her medical supplies. "You should get some rest. Tomorrow will be another long day." Aaron rose, his height making the kitchen seem suddenly smaller. "Violet," he said, using her first name for the first time. "I meant what I said. We'll find a way through this." The simple statement, delivered with such quiet conviction, touched something in her that had been walled off for a long time, the part of her that yearned to share her burdens, to not always stand alone against the world. "Good night, Aaron," she replied softly. "And thank you for everything today." He nodded, holding her gaze a moment longer before leaving. Violet remained in the kitchen, her emotions in turmoil. She'd spent years building walls around her heart, knowing that vulnerability was a luxury she couldn't afford. But Aaron Xavier had somehow found cracks in those defenses without even trying, and she wasn't sure if that terrified or exhilarated her. The next morning brought confirmation of their suspicions about the fire's origin. Hank found clear evidence of deliberate fire, setting oil-soaked rags and matches along the eastern boundary of the property. "Porter's gone too far this time," Violet said grimly when Hank reported his findings. "Rustling is one thing, but arson, he could have killed someone." "We should take this to the sheriff," Aaron suggested. "Arson is a serious crime, one that even Porter's connections might not be able to dismiss." "The sheriff will want more than suspicions," Violet pointed out. "We need proof that Porter was behind it." "Then we'll get proof," Aaron said decisively. "One of Porter's men might be willing to talk for the right incentive." They rode into town later that morning, the evidence of fire setting carefully preserved in a saddlebag. The sheriff listened to their account with obvious skepticism. "Oil-soaked rags don't prove Porter was involved," he said dismissively. "Could have been drifters or even an accident. 3 separate starting points all along my property line with Porter's ranch," Violet challenged. "That's no accident." Sheriff Wilson shrugged. "Without a witness willing to testify against Porter, my hands are tied." As they left the sheriff's office, frustrated but not surprised, Aaron touched Violet's arm. "I have an idea. Wait here." She watched curiously as he crossed the street to the saloon. Through the window, she could see him approach a thin, nervous-looking man drinking alone at the bar, one of Porter's ranch hands who'd been released after the rustling incident. They conversed briefly, then moved to a corner table out of her line of sight. 20 minutes later, Aaron emerged, a satisfied expression on his face. "What did you do?" Violet asked as he rejoined her. "Let's just say I made an investment in the truth," he replied. "That was Mike Donovan, one of Porter's newer hands. He's not particularly loyal to his employer, especially since Porter refused to post bail for him after the rustling arrest. You bribed him." "I offered him a job at the Rocking V and enough money to settle his debts in exchange for the truth about the fire," Aaron corrected. "He'll be at the sheriff's office tomorrow morning to make a statement." Violet stared at him. "You're spending your own money to help me fight Porter." Aaron met her gaze steadily. "I told you, I believe in what you're doing. Besides, men like Porter need to be stopped, or they'll just keep taking what isn't theirs." Something in his tone suggested he was speaking from experience, but before Violet could question him further, a commotion from the direction of the bank caught their attention. A group of men had gathered outside, including several members of the town council. Among them was Thomas Valentine, Violet's cousin, engaged in animated conversation with Judge Porter. "I don't like the look of that," Violet murmured, moving closer to overhear. "Foreclosure proceedings could begin immediately," Judge Porter was saying. "The bank is within its rights to call in the loan given the circumstances." "What loan?" Violet demanded, stepping forward. "The Rocking V has no outstanding loans." Thomas turned, his face showing momentary surprise before settling into a smug smile. "Ah, cousin, just the person we were discussing. It seems your father took out a loan against the ranch shortly before his death, one that's coming due." "That's a lie," Violet said flatly. "My father owned the Rocking V free and clear. I've seen all the papers." "Not all of them, apparently," Thomas replied, producing a document from his coat pocket. "This loan was arranged privately through Judge Porter's bank. Your father used the East pasture land as collateral." Violet snatched the paper from him, scanning it quickly. It appeared to be a legitimate loan agreement bearing what looked like her father's signature. The due date was just 2 weeks away, conveniently before her deadline to marry. "This is a forgery," she said, looking up with fury in her eyes. "My father would never have done this without telling me." "The signature has been verified by 2 witnesses," Judge Porter interjected smoothly. "I'm afraid it's quite legitimate, Miss Valentine. And with the collateral now destroyed by fire, the bank has no choice but to call in the full amount immediately." Aaron stepped forward, taking the document from Violet's hands. He studied it carefully, his expression inscrutable. "Convenient timing," he commented. "The fire destroys the very land used as collateral, forcing immediate repayment of a loan that no one knew existed until today." Judge Porter's eyes narrowed. "Are you implying something, sir?" "Just noting the extraordinary coincidence," Aaron replied mildly. "May I ask who verified this signature?" "The bank manager and myself," the judge said stiffly. "Both of us knew Robert Valentine well." "And when exactly was this loan taken out?" 3 months before Robert's passing," Thomas supplied. "When he was already ill." Violet's mind raced. Her father had indeed been sick in his final months, but he had remained clear-headed until the end. He had reviewed all the ranch affairs with her repeatedly, preparing her to take over. There was no way he would have hidden something this important. "How much?" she demanded. "How much is this supposed loan?" $5,000, Thomas said. "Due in full with interest by the 15th of next month." An enormous sum more than the annual profits of the ranch, especially with the East pasture now destroyed. It was clearly designed to be impossible for her to pay. "This is theft," Violet said, her voice shaking with anger. "You're trying to steal my ranch through forgery and fraud." "Be careful with your accusations, Miss Valentine," Judge Porter warned. "Slander is a serious matter." Aaron placed a steadying hand on Violet's arm. "We'll need time to review this document with our own legal counsel." "Of course," the judge agreed magnanimously. "But the payment date stands. $5,000 by the 15th, or foreclosure proceedings begin." As the men dispersed, looking entirely too pleased with themselves, Violet turned to Aaron, her face pale with fury and fear. "They planned this all along," she said in a low voice. "The rustling, the fire, it was all leading to this. They knew I couldn't fight a legal document in just 2 weeks, especially with the East pasture gone." Aaron was still studying the loan agreement, his brow furrowed. "There's something not right about this document. The paper, the ink. It doesn't look like it's been stored for over a year." "Can we prove it's a forgery?" "Possibly," he said. "But it would take time we don't have. And Judge Porter controls the legal system here." They walked in silence toward their horses, both deep in thought. The situation seemed increasingly desperate. Even if Violet found a husband in the next 2 weeks, the false loan would still be used to take the ranch. "There's one option we haven't discussed," Aaron said suddenly as they mounted up. "What's that?" "Fighting fire with fire." His blue eyes held a dangerous glint. "If they're willing to forge documents, perhaps we need to find evidence of their other misdeeds, something that would discredit them entirely." Violet stared at him. You're suggesting we look for dirt on Judge Porter and my cousin. I'm suggesting that men who engage in forgery, rustling, and arson rarely limit themselves to just those crimes, Aaron clarified. And I'm willing to bet that somewhere in their past dealings, they've left evidence. That would be dangerous, Violet said slowly. If they caught us investigating them. More dangerous than losing everything you've worked for, Aaron challenged. Sometimes you have to risk everything to save what matters most. As they rode back to the ranch, Violet considered his words. She had always played by the rules, believing that honesty and hard work would eventually be rewarded. But her opponents weren't playing by those same rules. Perhaps it was time to change tactics. All right, she said finally. Let's do it, but we'll need to be careful. Aaron nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. I'll start by looking into Judge Porter's banking records. A man who's willing to forge loan documents has likely been skimming funds for years. How will you get access to those records? A slight smile touched his lips. I have some experience with unconventional information gathering. Violet raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. There were clearly aspects of Aaron Xavier's past that remained mysterious, but right now, his skills, whatever their origin, might be exactly what she needed. That evening, as they sat on the porch after dinner, Violet found herself studying Aaron's profile in the fading light. The past 2 weeks had created a bond between them that transcended employer and employee, yet remained undefined. Tell me something true about yourself, Aaron Xavier, she said suddenly. Something I don't already know. He turned to face her, surprised by the request. After a moment's consideration, he spoke. I was married once, briefly. Her name was Elizabeth. She died in a cholera outbreak our first year together. Violet hadn't expected such a personal revelation. I'm sorry, she said softly. Aaron nodded, his eyes distant with memory. It was a long time ago, 7 years this summer, but it changed me, made me wary of putting down roots again. Until now, Violet asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. His gaze returned to her, warm and steady. Until now, he agreed quietly. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Violet was acutely aware of his proximity, of the rough strength of his hands resting on the porch railing, of the way the evening breeze ruffled his dark hair. What about you? Aaron asked finally. What's something true about Violet Valentine that the town doesn't know? She considered the question carefully. I'm afraid, she admitted, the words barely above a whisper. Not of losing the ranch, though that terrifies me too. I'm afraid of needing someone, of letting someone close enough that they could hurt me. Like your father hurt your mother by dying and leaving her alone. The insight was so accurate it took her breath away. Yes, she acknowledged, and like my mother hurt me by following him so quickly. Aaron's hand covered hers on the railing, warm and reassuring. Some risks are worth taking, Violet. The simple touch sent a current through her that was both frightening and exhilarating. For years, she had held herself apart, focused solely on proving herself capable, independent, strong. But strength, she was beginning to realize, wasn't about standing alone, it was about choosing carefully who to stand beside. We should get some rest, she said finally, reluctantly withdrawing her hand. Tomorrow will be a long day if we're going to start investigating Porter and Thomas. Aaron nodded, respecting her need for space. Good night, Violet. Good night, Aaron. As she lay in bed that night, sleep eluded Violet. Her mind raced with possibilities, dangers, and a new feeling that was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Aaron Xavier had become more than an employee, more than an ally in her fight to save the ranch. He had become someone she trusted, someone she admired, someone she was beginning to care for in ways that both thrilled and terrified her. And with just 2 weeks, until both deadlines, the false loan and her father's marriage requirement, she had to decide whether that caring was worth the risk of letting him closer. The next morning, they put their plan into action. Aaron rode into town early, ostensibly to inquire about cattle prices at the stockyard. His real purpose was to begin gathering information on Judge Porter's banking practices and Thomas Valentine's business dealings. Violet, meanwhile, focused on the ranch work. The loss of the east pasture meant reorganizing the grazing rotation for the entire herd. She worked alongside her men from dawn to dusk, moving cattle to the remaining pastures, calculating how long the grass would last, making difficult decisions about which animals might need to be sold early. It was exhausting work, physically and emotionally, but Violet welcomed the distraction. Every time her thoughts drifted to Aaron, to the warmth of his hand on hers, to the understanding in his eyes when she'd confessed her fears, she threw herself more fiercely into the labor at hand. As sunset approached, she was in the barn checking on a pregnant mare when Hank came looking for her. "Riders coming," he reported. "Looks like the sheriff and some others." Violet straightened, wiping her hands on her trousers. "How many?" "5, including Porter and your cousin." Her heart sank. This couldn't be good news. She stepped out of the barn just as the riders entered the yard. Sheriff Wilson led the group, looking uncomfortable. Behind him rode Ned Porter, Thomas Valentine, Judge Porter, and another man Violet recognized as a deputy. "Miss Valentine," the sheriff called, touching the brim of his hat in a half-hearted greeting. "We're here on official business." "What kind of official business brings 5 men to my ranch at dusk?" Violet asked, her voice steady despite the apprehension building within her. Sheriff Wilson dismounted, producing an official-looking document. "I have a warrant to search these premises for stolen property." "Stolen property?" Violet repeated incredulously. "What are you talking about?" Thomas stepped forward, a malicious smile playing on his lips. "A valuable pocket watch has gone missing from Judge Porter's home. A witness reported seeing it in the possession of one Aaron Xavier, who we understand is currently employed here." Violet's blood ran cold. They were setting Aaron up, obviously in response to his investigations in town. "That's ridiculous. Aaron Xavier is not a thief." "Then you won't mind if we search the bunkhouse and his personal belongings," the sheriff said, though his tone suggested it wasn't a request. "I do mind," Violet replied firmly. "This is private property, and this warrant is nothing but a transparent attempt to intimidate me." "Careful, cousin," Thomas warned. "Obstructing justice is a serious offense." Before Violet could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew everyone's attention. Aaron rode into the yard, taking in the scene with a quick, assessing glance. "What's going on here?" he asked, dismounting smoothly. Sheriff Wilson stepped forward. "Aaron Xavier, I have a warrant to search your belongings for a gold pocket watch stolen from Judge Porter's residence yesterday." Aaron's expression remained calm. "I haven't stolen anything, Sheriff, but you're welcome to search my things if it will clear this matter up." "Aaron," Violet protested, "you don't have to do this. It's clearly a setup." He gave her a reassuring look. "I have nothing to hide, Violet." The small group moved to the bunkhouse where Aaron had been staying. He opened his saddlebags and personal trunk, allowing the sheriff to inspect each item. The search was thorough but revealed nothing unusual until the deputy checked Aaron's jacket, hanging on a peg by the door. "Sheriff," the deputy called, reaching into the pocket. He withdrew a gleaming gold pocket watch. Violet's heart plummeted. "That's impossible," she whispered. Aaron stared at the watch, his jaw tightening. "I've never seen that before. Someone planted it." "A likely story," Ned Porter scoffed. "Sheriff," Arrest this man." Sheriff Wilson looked uncomfortable but duty-bound. "I'm sorry, Mr. Xavier, you'll have to come with us." "This is absurd," Violet exclaimed. "You all know this is a setup. Aaron has been investigating your fraudulent loan scheme and suddenly he's a thief." "No one will believe this." "Be careful with your accusations, Miss Valentine," Judge Porter warned. "Your loyalty to your employee is admirable, but it could lead you into legal troubles of your own." As the sheriff handcuffed Aaron, Violet felt a surge of helpless fury. Everything was unraveling. Aaron had been her strongest ally, and now they were taking him away on false charges. "I'll get you out," she promised him as they led him toward the waiting horses. Aaron met her eyes steadily. "I know you will, but be careful, Violet. They're desperate, which makes them dangerous." "I'll come to town first thing tomorrow," she said. "We'll fight this together." As the riders departed with their prisoner, Thomas lingered behind. "You know," he said conversationally, "this could all be resolved quite easily. Sign the ranch over to me now, and I'll see to it that the charges against your cowboy are dropped." Violet's eyes narrowed. "Get off my land, Thomas, before I forget we're family." He shrugged, apparently untroubled by her anger. "The offer stands, for now. But with your defender headed to jail and both deadlines approaching, you might want to reconsider. Sooner rather than later." As Thomas rode away, Violet stood in the gathering darkness, her mind racing. They had targeted Aaron specifically because he was helping her, because he was becoming important to her. The realization brought with it a clarity she hadn't expected. Aaron Xavier mattered to her more than she'd been willing to admit, even to herself. And she wasn't going to let him rot in jail for a crime he didn't commit. Nor was she going to surrender her ranch to the vultures circling it. It was time to fight back, and fight to win. Early the next morning, Violet rode into Llano with determination stealing her spine. She went first to the jail, where Sheriff Wilson reluctantly allowed her to see Aaron. 10 minutes, the sheriff grumbled, unlocking the cell door. Aaron looked up from the cot where he'd been sitting, his face brightening when he saw her. Despite the circumstances, he appeared remarkably composed. "Are you all right?" Violet asked, stepping into the small cell. "I've been in worse places," he assured her with a slight smile. "Though the company here leaves something to be desired." She glanced around to ensure they weren't being overheard, then lowered her voice. "This is my fault. They went after you because you were helping me." "No," Aaron said firmly, taking her hands in his. "This is their doing, not yours, and it only proves we were on the right track." "I'm going to get you out of here," Violet promised. "I don't know how yet, but I will." Aaron squeezed her hands gently. "I believe you, but in the meantime, there's something you need to know. Yesterday, before I was arrested, I discovered something important about that loan document." Violet leaned closer, hope flaring. "What is it?" "The paper it's written on is too new," Aaron explained. "It has a watermark from the Carson paper mill. That mill only opened 6 months ago. So the document couldn't possibly have been created before my father died," Violet realized, excitement building. "That proves it's a forgery." "Exactly. The problem is proving it to others. Judge Porter controls the court, and he's unlikely to allow evidence that exposes his own crimes." Violet nodded, understanding the dilemma. "We need leverage, something that would force them to back down even without a court ruling." "Yes, and I think I know where to find it," Aaron said, lowering his voice further. "In my investigations yesterday, I heard rumors about Judge Porter's banking practices. Apparently, he's been misappropriating funds from several estates he administers. If we could find proof." "How?" "We can't exactly walk into the bank and ask to see his records." Aaron's eyes held a glint of mischief. "No, but the bank clerk, Timothy Marsh, isn't particularly loyal to Porter. He's been passed over for promotion 3 times and he drinks too much at the saloon when he's feeling sorry for himself. Violet caught his meaning immediately. You think he might be willing to help us? For the right incentive, yes. Find him at the saloon tonight. Offer him a job at the Rocking V with better pay than he gets at the bank. The door to the cell block opened, and Sheriff Wilson's voice called, "Time's up, Miss Valentine." Violet rose reluctantly. "I'll do it, and I'll be back tomorrow." "Be careful," Aaron warned. "They'll be watching you now." As Violet turned to leave, Aaron caught her hand once more. "Violet," he said softly, "whatever happens, know that these past weeks have meant more to me than you can imagine." The intensity in his eyes sent a wave of emotion through her. "We'll talk about that when you're free," she replied, her voice catching slightly. "And you will be free, Aaron." "I promise." Outside the jail, Violet took a moment to compose herself. The situation was dire, but for the first time since this ordeal began, she felt a glimmer of hope. If they could prove the loan document was a forgery and expose Judge Porter's financial crimes, they might be able to force a resolution. She spent the day making preparations, visiting the Carson paper mill outside town to confirm when they had begun operations, then subtly asking around town about Timothy Marsh. By evening, she had formulated a plan. The Broken Spur Saloon was crowded when Violet entered, an unusual sight in itself, as respectable women rarely ventured into such establishments. Conversation briefly halted as the patrons noticed her, then resumed with increased volume, no doubt speculating about her presence. Violet ignored the stares and whispers, scanning the room until she spotted Timothy Marsh at a corner table, nursing a whiskey. He was a thin, nervous-looking man in his 30s, with the perpetually hunched shoulders of someone who spent his days bent over ledgers. She approached his table directly. "Mr. Marsh, may I join you?" Marsh looked up, startled to find Violet Valentine standing before him. "Miss Valentine, this isn't really a place for a woman," she finished for him, sliding into the chair opposite his. "Perhaps not. But it's the most convenient place to have a private conversation, don't you think? Particularly when that conversation might benefit both parties." Marsh glanced around nervously. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do," Violet said calmly. "You work at a bank where the president, Judge Porter, engages in questionable practices. Practices that, if discovered, might reflect poorly on all the bank's employees, even those who merely followed orders." Marsh's face paled. "You can't prove anything." "Not yet," she agreed. "But I'm prepared to offer you a way out before the trouble starts. A position at the Rocking V managing the ranch accounts. Better pay, a small house of your own, and most importantly, a clean slate." Marsh stared at her, clearly tempted but frightened. "Why would you offer me a job?" "Because I need information, Mr. Marsh. Information only you can provide." "About Judge Porter's dealings," Marsh whispered, glancing around again to ensure they weren't overheard. Violet nodded. "Specifically about certain estate funds he manages, and about a recent loan document involving my father's property." Marsh drained his whiskey, his hand trembling slightly. "If Porter found out I helped you—" "He won't," Violet assured him. "And by the time this is resolved, he'll be in no position to harm anyone." For a long moment, Marsh seemed to wrestle with his conscience. Finally, he leaned forward. "Porter's been skimming from the Whitney and Chambers estates for years. The orphan children won't see half of what their parents left them, and as for your father's loan—" He shook his head. "I first saw that document 3 days ago when Porter brought it to the bank and had it entered into the records. Backdated, of course. You have proof of any of this?" Violet asked. Marsh hesitated, then nodded. "I keep my own set of records. Insurance, you might say. I always suspected Porter might try to make me the scapegoat if his schemes were discovered. I need those records, Mr. Marsh. Meeting you here was dangerous enough, he protested. If I'm seen giving you documents. Tomorrow night, Violet suggested. Bring them to the Rocking V. I'll have a horse waiting for you behind the livery stable at sundown. Marsh considered this, then slowly nodded. All right, but if this goes wrong. It won't, Violet promised, rising from the table. Thank you, Mr. Marsh. You're doing the right thing. As she left the saloon, Violet felt eyes following her. She glanced back once to see Thomas Valentine watching from the bar, a suspicious frown on his face. She nodded coolly in his direction, then stepped out into the evening air. The next day passed with excruciating slowness. Violet visited Aaron again, briefly updating him on her conversation with Marsh. Aaron seemed pleased but cautioned her to be careful. If Thomas saw you talking to Marsh, he might suspect something, he warned. Make sure Marsh isn't followed when he comes to the ranch. I've thought of that, Violet assured him. Hank will watch the road and make sure he arrives safely. As evening approached, Violet grew increasingly anxious. Everything depended on Marsh's documents and his willingness to testify against Judge Porter. If anything went wrong, her fears were realized when Hank galloped into the yard just after sunset, his face grim. Marsh isn't coming, he reported. I waited at the livery like you said, but instead I overheard Porter's men talking. They caught Marsh trying to remove documents from the bank. He's been arrested for theft. Violet's heart sank. They must have been watching him after Thomas saw us talking. There's more, Hank said heavily. They're saying he confessed to conspiring with you and Xavier to frame Judge Porter. The judge has issued a warrant for your arrest. My arrest? Violet echoed incredulously. On what charges? Conspiracy, attempted fraud, interfering with a criminal investigation, the list goes on. They'll be coming for you tonight, Miss Violet. You need to leave. Violet's mind raced. Without Marsh's evidence, they had nothing concrete to prove the loan forgery or Porter's other crimes. And now she faced arrest herself, which would leave the Rocking V completely vulnerable. I can't leave, she said finally. This is my home, I won't run from it. Then you'll go to jail, Hank said bluntly. And Porter and your cousin will take everything. Violet paced the porch, weighing her options. There has to be another way. As darkness fell, she made her decision. Hank, I need you to do something for me. It's dangerous, and I won't hold it against you if you refuse. Just name it, the loyal foreman replied without hesitation. I need you to break Aaron out of jail. Hank's eyebrows shot up. That's a hanging offense, Miss Violet. I know, she acknowledged, but it may be our only chance now. Aaron was close to uncovering Porter's schemes. With him free, we might still find the evidence we need. And if we don't, Violet's expression hardened, then at least we'll have fought to the end on our own terms. After a moment's consideration, Hank nodded. I'll need Diego and Sam to help. We'll go tonight after the town quiets down. Thank you, Violet said, gratitude flooding her voice. I'll never forget this. Just make sure it's worth it, Hank replied grimly. The wait was agonizing. Violet prepared supplies, packed saddlebags with food and ammunition, and wrote out detailed instructions for running the ranch in her absence. If things went wrong, she and Aaron might need to flee at least temporarily. Shortly after midnight, she heard riders approaching. Her heart pounded as she stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, until she recognized Hank's distinctive whistle. 3 riders emerged from the darkness, Hank, Diego, and between them, Aaron Xavier, looking disheveled but unharmed. You got him, Violet breathed, relief washing over her. Aaron dismounted quickly, striding toward her. What were you thinking? He demanded, his voice tight with concern. Breaking me out of jail puts you all at risk of hanging. We're already at risk, Violet replied. Marsh was arrested before he could bring us the evidence. There's a warrant out for my arrest, too. Aaron absorbed this news with a grim expression. Then we have no choice but to find another way to expose Porter and your cousin. How? We've lost our best lead. Not necessarily, Aaron said thoughtfully. Marsh may have been caught, but he mentioned he keeps records. Those records must still exist somewhere. In the bank, probably, Hank pointed out, which is locked up tight at night and guarded during the day. A determined look settled over Aaron's features. Then we'll just have to get into the bank. Violet stared at him. You're suggesting we break into the bank? That's our only option at this point, Aaron finished for her. We need those records, Violet. Without them, you lose the ranch and we both face jail or worse. The logic was undeniable, if terrifying. They had crossed a line by breaking Aaron out of jail. There was no going back now, only forward, however dangerous the path. When? She asked simply. Tonight, Aaron decided. They'll be expecting us to run, not to strike directly at Porter's power base. The plan they formulated was simple by necessity. Hank, Diego, and Sam would create a distraction at the far end of town, a small fire in an abandoned shed that would draw attention without causing real damage. Meanwhile, Aaron and Violet would enter the bank through the rear window, which Aaron had noticed was poorly secured during his previous investigations. We're looking for a personal ledger, Aaron explained as they prepared. Something separate from the official bank books. Marsh seemed like a cautious man. He would have kept his insurance policy well hidden but accessible. As they rode toward town, keeping to back trails and moving quietly, Violet found herself studying Aaron in the moonlight. He had risked everything to help her, his freedom, his reputation, potentially even his life. No one had ever shown such faith in her, such willingness to stand beside her against overwhelming odds. Aaron, she said softly as they approached the outskirts of Lano. If this goes wrong, it won't, he interrupted. But if it does, she persisted, I want you to know that these weeks with you have been extraordinary. You really saw me when everyone else only saw a stubborn woman who didn't know her place. Aaron reined his horse to a stop, turning to face her fully. Violet Valentine, he said, his voice low and intense. Your strength is what drew me to you from the beginning, not despite it, but because of it. Whatever happens tonight, know that meeting you changed everything for me. In the silver moonlight, his eyes held such warmth, such certainty, that Violet's breath caught. Impulsively, she leaned across the space between their horses and pressed her lips to his, a brief, fierce kiss that conveyed everything she couldn't put into words. When she pulled back, Aaron's expression was one of wonder and determination. We will win this fight, he promised. Together. The town was quiet as they approached, most windows dark. They left their horses hidden in a stand of trees behind the bank and moved carefully through the shadows. In the distance, they heard shouts as Hank's distraction took effect, the glow of flames visible at the far end of the main street. Now, Aaron whispered, boosting Violet up to the window he'd identified. She worked the simple latch with her knife, then slipped inside, Aaron following close behind. The bank's back room was dark and silent. They moved cautiously, using a shielded lantern to navigate. Aaron led the way to Porter's office, a spacious room with a large desk and several filing cabinets. Start with the desk, Aaron suggested. Look for anything hidden, false bottoms in drawers, secret compartments. They searched methodically, conscious of each passing minute. The distraction wouldn't keep the town occupied for long. Nothing, Violet muttered in frustration after examining the desk thoroughly. Where else would Marsh hide his records? Aaron surveyed the room thoughtfully. Not in Porter's office, too risky. It would be somewhere Marsh had regular access to, but others wouldn't notice. His own desk, Too obvious. Aaron's gaze settled on a painting of Lano's founding fathers that hung on the wall. Sometimes the best hiding place is in plain sight. He carefully lifted the painting from its hook, revealing a small wall safe behind it. This would be accessible to both Porter and Marsh as head clerk. "Can you open it?" Violet asked anxiously. Aaron examined the safe with a professional eye. "It's a simple model. Give me a few minutes." Violet watched in amazement as Aaron pressed his ear to the safe and began working the dial with practiced precision. "Where did you learn to crack safes?" she whispered. "During the war," he replied, concentrating on the subtle clicks of the mechanism. "I was assigned to intelligence gathering for a while. Some skills prove useful long after the fighting ends." With a final twist of the dial, the safe door swung open. Inside were several pouches of cash, some jewelry, and most importantly, a leather-bound ledger with the initials TM discreetly embossed on the cover. "This is it," Aaron said, quickly leafing through the book. "Marsh's private record of Porter's transactions. Everything's here: the misappropriated estate funds, falsified loans, even records of bribes paid to local officials. And my father's loan." Aaron turned to the most recent entries. "Here, dated 3 days ago with a note that it was to be recorded as having been executed 18 months earlier." He looked up, triumph in his eyes. "This is everything we need." The sound of approaching voices from the street outside interrupted their celebration. "The distraction's over," Violet whispered. "We need to go." They quickly replaced the painting, tucked the ledger into Aaron's jacket, and moved toward the back window. They had almost reached it when the front door of the bank opened, voices drifting in from the main room. "Check the offices," a familiar voice ordered Thomas Valentine. If they were going to try anything, the bank would be their target. Aaron pushed Violet toward the window. "Go," he whispered urgently. "I'm right behind you." She slipped through the opening, landing lightly in the alley behind the bank. Aaron passed the ledger out to her, then began to follow. He was halfway through the window when a shout rang out. "There!" In Porter's office, a gunshot echoed and Aaron fell awkwardly through the window, landing hard on the ground beside Violet. In the dim light, she could see a spreading darkness on his left sleeve. "Blood." "Aaron!" she gasped, reaching for him. "I'm all right," he said through gritted teeth. "Just grazed me." "Run!" They fled through the back alleys of Lano, the sound of pursuit not far behind. Aaron was favoring his left arm but keeping pace with Violet as they raced toward their hidden horses. "They're heading for the trees," Thomas's voice called from somewhere behind them. As they reached their horses, Aaron turned to Violet, his expression grave. "We need to split up. They'll expect us to stay together." "No," she protested. "You're hurt." "It's just a flesh wound," he assured her. "Take the ledger. Head for the rocking V. I'll lead them in the opposite direction, then circle back to meet you." "Aaron, trust me, Violet," he said fiercely. "I'll find you." Before she could argue further, he kissed her quickly, then mounted his horse. "Go now." With a final reluctant nod, Violet swung onto her mare and galloped toward the ranch, the precious ledger secured inside her jacket. Behind her, she heard Aaron riding in the opposite direction, deliberately making enough noise to draw their pursuers after him. The ride back to the rocking V was a blur of anxiety and determination. When she arrived, Hank was waiting anxiously on the porch. "Where's Xavier?" he asked immediately. "Creating a diversion," Violet explained quickly, dismounting. "He was hit not badly," he said, "but he's bleeding. We need to be ready when he arrives." "If he arrives," Hank said grimly, "the whole town's up in arms. Sheriffs deputized half the men in Lano to search for you too." Violet clutched the ledger tighter. "It was worth it. We found proof of everything: the forged loan, Porter's embezzlement, all of it." "That's something, at least," Hank acknowledged. But what now? That ledger won't do you much good if you're in jail, or worse. It was a question Violet had been avoiding. They had the evidence, but no legal way to use it. Judge Porter controlled the court, Sheriff Wilson was firmly under Porter's influence, and the town council was largely composed of Porter's allies. We need to get this to someone who can't be bought or intimidated, she realized. Someone outside Porter's sphere of influence. The federal marshal in Austin, Hank suggested. Too far, Violet said, shaking her head. We'd never make it before Porter's men caught up to us. The army, then. There's a cavalry detachment at Fort Davis just 3 days' ride west. Violet considered this. The army might indeed be their best hope federal authority that even Judge Porter couldn't override. We'll need to leave as soon as Aaron returns, she decided. Pack supplies for a hard ride. But as dawn approached with no sign of Aaron, Violet's concern grew into full-blown fear. Had he been captured? Was he lying wounded somewhere, unable to reach her? The answer came with the rising sun, in the form of a lone rider approaching the ranch. Violet rushed onto the porch, hope rising, then falling as she recognized not Aaron but Mike Donovan, the former Porter employee whom Aaron had spoken with earlier. "Miss Valentine," Donovan called, dismounting hurriedly. "Xavier sent me. He's been captured." Violet's heart seemed to stop. "Where?" "Is he all right?" "They caught him at Miller's Creek," Donovan reported. "He's alive, but they're not taking him back to jail. Porter and your cousin are talking about a more permanent solution to the problem." "They're going to kill him," Violet whispered, horror washing over her. Donovan nodded grimly. "They're holding him at Porter's ranch, planning to make it look like he was killed trying to escape across the border. From what I heard, they'll do it tonight. We have to save him," Violet said immediately, turning to Hank. "Gather the men. Every hand who's willing to ride." "That's suicide, Miss Violet," Hank protested. "Porter has at least 15 men at his ranch. We'd be outnumbered." "We don't need to fight them all," Violet replied, her mind racing. "Just create enough confusion to get Aaron out." "There's something else," Donovan added. "Before they caught him, Xavier told me to tell you to use the ledger, said you'd understand." Violet looked down at the leather book she still clutched. Aaron was right, the ledger was their most powerful weapon, their best chance of ending this once and for all. "Hank, I need you to take this ledger to Fort Davis immediately," she decided. "Explain everything to the commanding officer there. Tell him we have evidence of multiple federal crimes committed by Judge Porter, including embezzlement of federal pension funds." "And what will you be doing?" Hank asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Saving Aaron," Violet said simply. "I won't let them kill him for helping me." "You can't go to Porter's ranch alone," Hank argued. "That's exactly what they want to capture both of you." "I won't be alone," Violet replied, looking at Donovan. "Will I?" Donovan shifted uncomfortably but nodded. "Xavier helped me when Porter hung me out to dry. I owe him." "And Diego and Sam will come with me," Violet continued. "The rest of the men will stay here to protect the ranch." Hank clearly wanted to object further but recognized the determination in Violet's eyes. "All right," he conceded. "But promise me you won't do anything foolish. The army will come once they see that ledger. You just need to keep Xavier alive until then." "That's exactly what I intend to do," Violet assured him. As Hank prepared to depart for Fort Davis, Violet gathered Diego and Sam to plan their rescue attempt. Donovan provided valuable information about the layout of Porter's ranch and the likely location where Aaron would be held. "The old line shack near the north boundary," Donovan explained. "It's isolated enough that no one would hear gunshots, but still on Porter's property so they can claim jurisdiction." "How many men will be guarding him?" Violet asked. "4, probably. Porter will want to keep this quiet even among his own hands. Violet considered their options. We'll approach after dark. If we can create a distraction, maybe drive some of Porter's cattle past the cabin, the guards might be drawn out long enough for us to get to Aaron. The plan was risky, dependent on many variables beyond their control, but it was the best they could devise under the circumstances. As they prepared weapons and supplies for the night's mission, Violet tried to quiet the fear that had settled in her chest since learning of Aaron's capture. She had known him for less than a month, yet the thought of losing him was unbearable. Somewhere in the midst of their shared struggles, their partnership in adversity, he had become essential to her in ways she was only beginning to understand. "Hold on, Aaron," she whispered to the setting sun. "I'm coming for you." Night fell, bringing with it a shroud of clouds that obscured the moon, a blessing for their stealthy approach to Porter's ranch. Violet, Diego, Sam, and Donovan rode carefully, avoiding the main trails, their horses' hooves muffled with cloth wrapped around each shoe. They left their mounts in a sheltered draw half a mile from their target and proceeded on foot, each carrying a rifle and sidearm. Donovan led the way, his knowledge of Porter's property guiding them through the darkness. The line shack came into view, a small, sturdy cabin with light glowing from a single window. 2 horses were tied up outside, suggesting fewer guards than they had anticipated. "That's strange," Donovan whispered as they crouched behind a ridge overlooking the cabin. "Porter wouldn't leave a prisoner like Xavier with just 2 men. Maybe the others are inside," Diego suggested. Violet studied the scene carefully. "Or maybe they've already moved him." "Only one way to find out," Sam said grimly. Their plan had been to drive a small group of Porter's cattle past the cabin as a distraction, but with only 2 guards visible, Violet reconsidered. "We need to take them by surprise," she decided. "Donovan and I will circle around to the rear of the cabin. Diego, you and Sam approach from the front when you hear our signal." "What's the signal?" Diego asked. Violet patted the revolver at her hip. "You'll know it when you hear it." Moving silently through the brush, Violet and Donovan made their way to the back of the cabin. There was no rear window, only a solid wall of rough-hewn logs, but voices were audible from inside, 3 distinct male voices, one of which Violet recognized with a surge of relief as Aaron's. "He's alive," she whispered to Donovan. Drawing closer, they could make out parts of the conversation. "Waste of time," one voice was saying. "Porter wants him dead before sunrise. We're supposed to wait for Thomas," another replied. "He wants to be here for it." "Why wait?" the first argued. "Dead is dead." Aaron's voice came next, strained but defiant. "Porter won't get away with this. The evidence is already on its way to federal authorities." A harsh laugh followed. "You think we're worried about some cooked-up evidence? Judge Porter owns this county. By the time any federal man shows up, there won't be anything to find." Violet had heard enough. She needed to act before Thomas arrived with reinforcements. Catching Donovan's eye, she pointed to the corner of the cabin, indicating he should be ready to move. Drawing her revolver, Violet fired 2 quick shots into the air, the signal for Diego and Sam to approach from the front. The reaction inside the cabin was immediate. The door burst open as one guard rushed out, rifle ready, only to find himself facing Diego and Sam with weapons drawn. "Drop it," Diego ordered. Instead, the guard fired, the shot going wide as Diego dived to the side. Sam returned fire, hitting the guard in the shoulder and sending him sprawling in the dust. At the same time, the second guard appeared at the cabin's single window, taking aim at Diego. Violet fired first, her bullet splintering the window frame inches from the man's head. He ducked back inside with a curse. "We've got you surrounded," Violet shouted. Send Xavier out unharmed and you can all walk away from this." A moment of tense silence followed, then Aaron's voice called out, "Violet, there are 3 of them in here. Shut up." Another voice snarled, followed by the sound of a scuffle. "Last chance," Violet called. "Let him go or this ends badly for everyone." The cabin door opened slowly. "We're coming out," one of the guards announced. "Don't shoot." 2 men emerged first, hands raised, one supporting the wounded guard who'd been shot outside. Behind them came Aaron, his hands bound behind his back, a bruise darkening one side of his face but otherwise appearing unharmed. Relief flooded through Violet at the sight of him. Their eyes met across the short distance, and she saw the same emotion reflected in his gaze. "Untie him," she ordered, keeping her revolver trained on the guards. One of the men reluctantly complied, cutting Aaron's bonds. As soon as he was free, Aaron moved to Violet's side. "You shouldn't have come," he said quietly, even as his eyes conveyed his gratitude. "It's too dangerous." "I wasn't about to let them kill you," she replied simply. Donovan and Diego quickly bound the 3 guards while Sam kept watch for any sign of approaching riders. "We need to move quickly," Aaron urged. "Thomas will be here soon with more men." They retreated to where they'd left their horses, bringing the bound guards with them to prevent them from raising an alarm. As they mounted up, Violet explained her plan to Aaron. "Hank's taking the ledger to Fort Davis. Once the army sees the evidence, they'll have to act." Aaron nodded approval. "Good thinking. But Porter and Thomas won't give up easily. We need to find somewhere safe to wait for the cavalry." "The old Colton place," Donovan suggested. "It's been abandoned for years, but the main house is still standing. It's in a defensible position with good sight lines in all directions." They set the bound guards free once they were far enough from Porter's ranch that it would take hours for them to walk back, then rode hard for the Colton homestead. The abandoned ranch house stood on a small rise, its windows dark but its stone walls still solid. As dawn broke, they established a defensive position, taking turns watching the approaches to the property. Aaron and Violet found a moment alone as they checked the house's rear perimeter. "I was afraid we wouldn't reach you in time," Violet admitted, finally allowing herself to acknowledge the fear she'd been holding at bay. Aaron touched her face gently. "I knew you'd come, just as I would have come for you." "They hurt you," she said, lightly touching the bruise on his cheek. "Nothing serious," he assured her. "I've had worse from breaking wild horses." Violet studied him, struck anew by the calm strength he radiated even in crisis. "Why did you do it, Aaron? Why risk everything for my ranch for me?" His blue eyes held hers steadily. "Because from the moment I heard about the stubborn Valentine woman fighting to keep her land, I knew you were someone worth fighting for. And when I met you, when I saw your courage, your determination, your heart, I knew I'd found something I'd been searching for since the war ended." "What was that?" she asked softly. "A place to belong," he answered simply. "A cause worth standing for, and someone I could stand beside, not in front of or behind." Violet felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "Even if it cost you your life, some things are worth the risk, Violet." His hand moved to cup her cheek. "You taught me that." She leaned into his touch, the walls around her heart crumbling completely. "When this is over," she whispered, "if we survive this." "When we survive this," Aaron corrected gently. "When we survive this," Violet amended. I want her words were cut short by a shout from Diego, who was watching the eastern approach. "Riders coming, at least a dozen." They rushed to join the others at the front of the house. In the distance, a cloud of dust marked the approach of multiple horsemen. "Porter and Thomas," Aaron said grimly. "They must have found the guards we released." "There's too many," Sam observed nervously. "We can't hold them off for long." Violet surveyed their position. The stone house offered good cover, but they were outnumbered at least 3-1 with limited ammunition. Their best hope was to hold out until help arrived from Fort Davis, but that could be days away. "We make every shot count," she decided, "and we don't give up." As the riders drew closer, Aaron touched Violet's arm. "Whatever happens in the next few hours," he said quietly, "know that meeting you has been the greatest privilege of my life." She covered his hand with hers, drawing strength from his touch. "We're going to survive this, Aaron Xavier. Together. And then I have a proposition for you about that marriage requirement." A smile touched his lips despite the gravity of their situation. "I look forward to hearing it." The approaching riders split into two groups, circling to surround the old ranch house. Through a window, Violet could make out Thomas Valentine leading one group, Ned Porter the other. "Valentine," Thomas's voice called out, "we know you're in there. Come out now and maybe we won't hang your whole crew alongside you and Xavier." "Not very tempting terms," Aaron called back. "Perhaps you'd like to reconsider your offer." "There's no way out this time," Porter shouted. "The only question is how many of your people die with you." Violet and Aaron exchanged a look of determination. "We hold," she said firmly, and he nodded agreement. The first shots came moments later, probing fire aimed at the windows and doors. Diego returned fire, forcing one of Porter's men to dive for cover. "Make every shot count," Aaron reminded them all. "They'll try to wear us down, make us waste ammunition." The standoff continued through the morning, occasional exchanges of gunfire punctuating long stretches of tense silence. By midday, the heat inside the stone house had become nearly unbearable, and their water supply was running dangerously low. "They're playing a waiting game," Aaron observed grimly. "They know time is on their side." Violet wiped sweat from her brow, trying to ignore her parched throat. "We just need to hold out until Hank reaches Fort Davis." "That's still at least a day away if he rode hard," Aaron calculated. "And then another day for the cavalry to reach us." The implications hung in the air, unspoken but understood by all. Their situation was becoming increasingly desperate. As the afternoon wore on, Porter's men grew bolder, moving closer to the house under cover of suppressing fire. One nearly reached the front door before Sam's careful shot drove him back. "They're testing our defenses, looking for weak spots," Aaron warned. "They'll make a coordinated rush soon." Violet checked their remaining ammunition. "We have maybe 30 rounds left between us." Not enough for a prolonged fight. The situation seemed increasingly hopeless when Donovan, who was watching the western approach, suddenly called out, "Riders coming from the west, a lot of them." Aaron rushed to the window, his expression tense. Then, unexpectedly, he began to laugh, a sound of pure relief. "What is it?" Violet demanded, joining him. "Cavalry," he said, pointing to the distant riders now clearly visible on the horizon. "That's a U.S. cavalry detachment." Hope surged through Violet as she recognized the distinctive formation of the approaching horsemen, at least 20 cavalry troopers in uniform, riding hard toward the Colton place. "How?" she whispered. "Hank couldn't have reached Fort Davis yet." "I don't know," Aaron admitted. "But I'm not complaining." Porter and Thomas had also spotted the approaching soldiers. Their men were already mounting up, preparing to flee rather than be caught attacking civilians by federal troops. "This isn't over, Valentine," Thomas shouted as he wheeled his horse around. "You haven't heard the last of this." But his threats sounded hollow as the cavalry detachment thundered closer, clearly intent on intercepting Porter's retreating men. Within minutes, the yard in front of the old ranch house was filled with blue uniformed soldiers. At their head rode a tall, distinguished-looking officer who surveyed the scene with a practiced eye. "Captain James Reynolds, 4th Cavalry," he announced as Violet, and Aaron emerged cautiously from the house. "Which one of you is Violet Valentine?" "I am," Violet answered, stepping forward. "And I'm guessing you're Aaron Xavier," the captain continued, looking at Aaron. "We've been looking for you both." "How did you find us?" Aaron asked, bewilderment evident in his voice. "A telegraph arrived at Fort Davis yesterday from Austin," Reynolds explained. "From the federal marshal there, ordering us to investigate allegations of corruption and attempted murder involving Judge William Porter and associates." "But how did the marshal in Austin know?" Violet pressed. "We only discovered the evidence ourselves 2 days ago." A familiar figure rode into the yard behind the cavalry. Timothy Marsh, the bank clerk who had been arrested before he could deliver his evidence to Violet. "Mr. Marsh," Violet exclaimed in surprise. "We thought you were in jail." Marsh dismounted, looking rather pleased with himself despite his disheveled appearance. "I was, briefly, but I had a contingency plan. When I realized Porter was onto me, I sent copies of my records to the federal marshal in Austin by stage the day before they arrested me." "You clever man," Aaron said with genuine admiration. "You had insurance for your insurance." "After years of watching Porter operate, I learned to be thorough," Marsh replied modestly. Captain Reynolds stepped forward again. "Judge Porter, Ned Porter, and Thomas Valentine are all being taken into custody on multiple federal charges, including embezzlement of federal pension funds, mail fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder." Relief washed over Violet in a dizzying wave. It was over. They had won. "The loan document?" she asked anxiously. "The one claiming my father borrowed against the ranch, already declared fraudulent by the federal prosecutor," Reynolds assured her. "Your property is secure, Miss Valentine, though I understand there's still the matter of your father's will requiring marriage." Violet looked at Aaron, finding him already watching her with a warmth that made her heart race. "I believe that requirement will be satisfied very soon," she said softly. Aaron's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "If the lady will have me," he agreed. Captain Reynolds tactfully directed his men to secure the perimeter, giving Violet and Aaron a moment of privacy on the porch of the old ranch house. "Did you mean that?" Aaron asked when they were alone. "About the marriage requirement?" Violet stepped closer to him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I did, but not because of my father's will or the ranch." "Why then?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "Because somewhere between you riding into Lano and us fighting side by side against impossible odds, I fell in love with you, Aaron Xavier." The words, once spoken, felt like the most natural truth she had ever uttered. "You saw my strength as something to admire, not to change or control. And your strength became mine when I needed it most." Aaron's hands framed her face with infinite tenderness. "Violet Valentine, I've loved you since the moment you stood in that courthouse, refusing to bend even when the whole world was against you. I would be honored to stand beside you for all the days to come as your husband, your partner, your equal." Their lips met in a kiss that held all the promise of the future stretching before them, a future they would build together, strength matched with strength, heart with heart. 2 weeks later, under a clear Texas sky, Violet Valentine and Aaron Xavier were married on the porch of the rocking V Ranch house. The ceremony was simple but joyous, attended by the ranch hands who had stood by them through the darkest days, and by friends from neighboring ranches who had come to respect the woman who fought so fiercely for what was hers. Judge Porter and his conspirators awaited trial in Austin, their power in Lano broken. Timothy Marsh had indeed taken a position managing the rocking Viticus accounts, proving himself as meticulous with the ranch's finances as he had been in documenting Porter's crimes. As Violet and Aaron spoke their vows, she wore not the traditional white dress that might have been expected, but a practical riding skirt and embroidered blouse that represented who she truly was, a woman of the land, strong and capable, who had chosen to share her life not because she needed to, but because she wanted to. "I take you not as my protector or my master," Violet said in her vows, her voice clear and confident, "but as my partner, my equal, my heart's choice." Aaron's response echoed her sentiments. "I take you not to shield or to lead, but to stand beside through whatever lies ahead. Your strength is mine, as mine is yours, now and always." When they were pronounced husband and wife, the cheer that went up from the assembled guests was loud enough to startle a flock of birds from a nearby tree. Hank, standing nearby as Aaron's best man, wiped a suspicious moisture from his weathered cheek. That evening, as sunset painted the Texas sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Violet and Aaron stood on the porch of what was now their shared home, looking out over the land that had brought them together. "Mrs. Xavier," Aaron said softly, his arm around her waist, "how does it feel?" Violet leaned into him, savoring the solid warmth of his presence. "Wonderful, though I'm thinking of keeping Valentine for the ranch name. Rocking V has a certain ring to it." "It certainly does," Aaron agreed with a smile, "and it's fitting that your father's legacy continues." "Our legacy now," Violet corrected him. "This ranch, this land, it's ours to build together." Aaron turned to face her fully, his eyes reflecting the deepening twilight. "I was thinking about that. With the spring roundup coming, we'll need to expand the operation if we want to meet those contracts you signed." "What did you have in mind?" Violet asked, recognizing the thoughtful tone in his voice that usually preceded an interesting idea. "The Double X Ranch to the north is still available. James Williams is heading back east, looking to sell quickly. If we pooled our resources, we could acquire it, double our grazing land." Violet's eyes widened at the ambition of his proposal. "That would make Rocking V the largest spread in the county." "The largest in 3 counties," Aaron corrected with a grin, "with room to grow even further." "Aaron Xavier," Violet laughed, "are you suggesting we build an empire?" "I'm suggesting we build a future," he replied, drawing her closer. "One worthy of the woman who was too stubborn to be a proper bride." "And the man who saw that stubbornness as strength," Violet added softly. Their kiss sealed the promise of that future, a future built on mutual respect, shared dreams, and the unshakable foundation of 2 strong hearts that had found in each other not completion, but amplification of their own power. 5 years later, the Rocking V had indeed grown into the largest and most prosperous ranch in the region. Aaron and Violet Xavier had expanded their holdings to include not just the Double X, but 2 other adjoining properties, creating a vast and thriving cattle operation that employed dozens of workers and shipped herds to markets as far away as Chicago. More precious than their material success, however, was the family they had built. Their twins, Robert and Elizabeth, named for Violet's father and Aaron's first wife, were now 3 years old, already showing signs of inheriting their parents' determination and spirit. A new baby was expected in the spring, a prospect that filled both parents with joy. On the anniversary of their wedding, Aaron and Violet rode out together to the eastern ridge of their property, the same ridge where they had stood watching the aftermath of the fire that had nearly cost them everything. Now, the land below was lush with grass, dotted with healthy cattle bearing the Rocking V brand. "You ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" Violet asked as they sat their horses side by side, watching the sunset gild the landscape. Aaron considered the question. "Sometimes. If I hadn't ridden into Leno that day, if Porter had succeeded in his schemes, if the cavalry hadn't arrived when they did, we might have lost it all, Violet acknowledged. Or we might still have found each other some other way, Aaron suggested, reaching across to take her hand. I like to think that some things are meant to be, no matter what obstacles stand in the way. Violet squeezed his hand, feeling the familiar strength and gentleness in his grip. Who would have thought that being too stubborn would lead to all of this? Aaron's smile was as warm as the setting sun. I knew from the first moment, your strength is mine, Violet Xavier, and together there's nothing we can't face. As they turned their horses toward home, toward their children, their future, their shared dream, Violet knew with absolute certainty that he was right. The strength that others had once seen as a flaw, as something to be corrected or controlled, had been recognized by Aaron as her greatest gift. And in that recognition, in that acceptance, they had both found something rare and precious, a love built not on need or dependency, but on mutual admiration and respect. The stubborn bride and the perceptive cowboy had created something remarkable together, a partnership of equals that would endure, like the Texas land they called home, through whatever challenges the future might bring.